Myra Breckinridge is one of the most notorious catastrophes of all time. Before the film had even been finished, cast members like Rex Reed were publicly condemning it. Star Raquel Welch says that she knew something was wrong before they had even started filming the movie. Gore Vidal, the author of the source material, hated the movie, although it's not totally clear that he ever watched it. The movie destroyed director Michael Sarne's career. Now, you've heard of Michael Sarne. No, you haven't, because his career ended right after this movie came out. It dented Raquel Welch's star trajectory. You probably have heard of her. I guess she recovered more or less. This is a movie that just about everyone seems to regret. The people involved with it, even the people who just watch it. Everyone except me, that is. Myra Breckinridge is rated 4.5 on IMDb, and it's absolutely no mystery why it was controversial. But I'm here to tell you that Myra Breckinridge is actually not that bad. In fact, I might even call it good. Now, to be clear, I wouldn't recommend this to anyone but the most curious and open-minded cinephile. If you're a bit older, you're likely to find the movie blasphemous and obscene. If you're a bit younger, you might find it homophobic and transphobic. And in both cases, you might be right. Besides the incendiary politics, Myra Breckinridge has other big flaws. It's vague, it's unfocused, it doesn't really make sense, it has a lot of inexplicable decisions. Still, I like the movie. I'll try to explain why, although I'm not exactly sure that I can. And again, I don't really recommend it. I don't have reviewer's insurance, okay? So don't watch this and become upset with me. The first thing to know about the movie, I guess, is that the cast is unhinged. I've mentioned Raquel Welch and Rex Reed already. Rex Reed was a critic of the time, not exactly a theoretical critic so much as a television critic, I guess, a film critic, but who is on a lot of talk shows, I suppose. They play the same character, Rex Reed and Raquel Welch. They play the same character, sort of. This movie focuses on a gay man who gets a sex change operation. This is Myra Breckinridge, or originally Myron Breckinridge. Rex Reed plays Myron, Raquel Welch plays Myra. After surgery, Myra heads to Hollywood to, as she puts it, destroy American masculinity. Raquel Welch apparently thought that she would be playing both Myra and Myron. She was hoping to grow her range as an actor with this film. And that's why she took the role. At least that's what she claims. That's her excuse when asked why the heck she would ever have wanted to appear in Myra Breckinridge. In Hollywood, Myra becomes a lecturer at an acting school. A lot of the movie takes place on the sort of bizarre campus of this acting school, which is a thinly disguised Hollywood backlot. Thinly disguised, probably on purpose. Most of the students here are hip 1970s folk. This movie came out in 1970. But the school is styled after Westerns. It's kind of stuck in the past in some ways, and it's run by a guy named Buck Loner, who is played by John Huston. You heard that right. John Huston is in this movie. Mae West is also in this movie. Mae West is in this movie. What's going on? She came out of retirement to play superstar agent Letitia Van Allen. This, let me tell you, is an absolutely baffling character. Out of all the characters I've seen in all the movies I've seen, Letitia Van Allen, well, honestly, a lot of the characters in this movie are right up there with some of the most baffling characters you will ever find. I'll come back to these elements soon. Let me finish out the cast first, though. Farrah Fawcett is also in this movie. I mean, what a cast. This is a very early role for her. We've also got Jim Backus, John Carradine, Andy Devine, and Tom Selleck in smaller roles. Great cast. Like I said, Michael Sarne directed it. He was a British director who had enjoyed a modest success with a movie called Joanna. He hasn't really directed anything since Myra Breckinridge, but he has had a few small acting parts in movies like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and even Les Miserables. John Phillips, a friend of the director, friend of Michael Sarne, made the music for Myra Breckinridge. Who was John Phillips? He was in the Mamas and the Papas. He wrote most of their music. If you watch any of their videos of them performing any of their music videos or them lip-syncing along on some TV show, he's usually the guy with the guitar. John Phillips was married to Michelle Phillips, who was also in the Mamas and the Papas, but they got divorced, and he would later on go on to marry someone named Genevieve Waite, who played Joanna in the movie Joanna. Waite, I don't know how to pronounce her name, to be honest. She's from South Africa, I guess. Genevieve Waite also has a cameo in this movie as the patient of a dental psychiatrist. You heard that right. a dental psychiatrist. Anyway, cool cast. You might not like the movie, but cool cast. I teased you a little bit with the plot here, and I'll come back to that. But first, I want to talk about the style. The first thing to say is that this movie is fairly well made, as in it doesn't look amateurish or feel like a B movie. You might not like the movie, but it's fairly clear that this was made at a big studio. This is not something like, Black Shampoo or any of these exploitation films I've reviewed that have been truly amateurish or like really low budget productions. This is a big studio film, and it shows. In its form, this movie reminds me of an episode of Laugh-In. It doesn't sit still at all, I guess is what I'm sort of referring to there. The story jumps around, but the style also is frenetic. There are a ton of clips of older Hollywood films spliced into the middle of this thing. This is a movie that is thematically and stylistically, in many ways, very deeply linked to classic Hollywood, and this is one way. The link to classic Hollywood is maybe slightly confounding. We'll talk about it a bit more. Sometimes all the old clips they throw in work really well. Sometimes they overdo it a little bit. Sometimes they lean pretty heavily on these clips rather than just showing us the movie. Maybe they knew that the movies they were excerpting were better than the ones that they were making. There's a real who's who of classic Hollywood spliced into the movie. Clark Gable is there, Marilyn Monroe. The movie opens with Shirley Temple being featured prominently. In 1970, I guess she was a U.S. ambassador, Shirley Temple Black, at that point. And the White House apparently asked them to remove her from the film. In fact, a number of actors or their estates or studios who owned their likenesses or whatever asked for things to be taken out of this movie. The DVD I have seems to include all this stuff. I wouldn't expect there to be a Blu-ray release anytime soon, but this DVD was okay. I actually watched this movie twice, the second time with Raquel Welch's commentary. Anyway, the style of the movie is engaging. Even if you hate everything about this movie, you probably won't be bored watching it. One of the things that I like about Myra Breckinridge is that it is an adventure to see. It might kill you, but it's an adventure to see it. Let's not kid ourselves, though. When people talk about Myra Breckinridge, they don't talk about the style or the interesting cameos or the mamas and the papas. They talk about controversy, and not the song by Prince, but some of the bizarre turns that this movie takes and some of the incendiary ones. So let's get to that. First of all, it's worth noting that the movie pushes the boundary in terms of nudity and sex on screen, regardless of anything else, regardless of the plot, the story, regardless of anything. This would always have upset some people because it's a little more graphic than what you would have expected. There would always be people who would think that this is blasphemous. As you'll see, though, the controversy goes way, way beyond this. Frankly, I think that Myra Breckinridge is such a mess that when you watch it now, you can conclude almost anything you want to about it. Let me give you two possible readings of the movie. This will start to reveal not only the sort of dicey territory that this movie lives in, but different. You'll see why this movie was so controversial, I think, if you haven't already, from the brief mention of the plot. One of these readings, I'll try to be sort of charitable, the other one maybe not so much. Like I said, Myra sets out to destroy American masculinity. These days, that doesn't sound so bad. I don't want to spoil the film's shock factor by telling you exactly what she does, but trust me, it's pretty literal. It's pretty literal and might be upsetting for some viewers. Myra's attacks on Hollywood institutions really are pretty fiendish, and the film's attacks on Hollywood institutions are pretty incendiary. I think it's sort of obvious why a traditional audience, someone who really likes classic Hollywood, wouldn't like this, right? As I describe this movie, it probably sounds like a bit of a satire. I think it's more complicated than that. The way that this movie is taking apart, or the way that it attacks classic Hollywood, is not exactly by being a good satire of classic Hollywood so much as being the opposite of classic Hollywood, by being this new blasphemous, terrible thing, I guess. But I'll come back to that a little bit later. For now, the question I'm trying to get at is whether Myra Breckinridge was simply ahead of its time, whether it simply pissed off people who like traditional movies, but now the cool progressives would like the movie. And the answer to whether or not it's simply ahead of its time is no. It has more problems. It does have its moments. For instance, the film, I think, really presages the Me Too movement in some places. Buck Lohner, the head of this acting school, for instance, is a lecherous old man who has cameras installed all over campus and who is constantly serviced by a roster of masseuses. In her commentary, Raquel Welch implies that this was modeled fairly directly off of a real person. Don't know who. Letitia Van Allen, the agent, is said to have slept with all of her clients. She has a bed in her office. Who doesn't? We might expect this corrupt agent character, we might expect it to be a man, and the starlets who are taken advantage of to be women. But in a movie with so many gender reversals, it's not totally clear how to read Mae West's character. So, like I said, maybe we're presaging the Me Too movement here. The first example, Buck Loner, pretty straightforward there, and you have to say that it is not exactly incisive, but it has something to say on that front. With Mae West's character, like I said, the gender reversal portion of it muddies the waters a little bit, but okay, we survive. Getting more into the murk, though, there's some interesting scenes at the acting school where students practice bedroom scenes. At one point, the professor asks for a volunteer, a woman, to undress and, get in this bed, and then a couple of men come and act with her. They're clothed. And the class essentially practices staging domestic violence together, right? A torrid love affair in bed. I hate your guts, but I want to sleep with you. Here's how you slap a woman, that kind of thing, right? So we could read it into this as a biting look at classic methods and how they inherently, or how they're part of this tradition of diminishing women, right? Actors are trained to slap, right? Some of the elements, of course, here remind me of the John Cassavetes film Opening Night. There's an extremely compelling line about part of the movie about the slap. There. That's a brilliant movie, far better than Myra Breckinridge. Stop this review, go watch that one. Anyway, this part of the curriculum could be sort of the epitome of this classic thing that's really regressive, but it actually, when you watch the movie, I don't know, it seems maybe that this part of the curriculum is driven more by the 1970s cohort. It's more the trendy people coming in, as in this might be the sort of thing that they would actually be doing on the set of a Cassavetes film in order to make a movie like Opening Night. They might be practicing, showing the violence of the past, the regressiveness of the past, or something like that. This scene is hard to interpret, honestly, and I kind of think it could go either way. And that applies to a lot of things in the movie. You can start to see how this movie really is not very stable. Watching it today, there are places where you might be tempted to reach for a progressive reading, but it really doesn't work that well. There's a lot of details that don't add up. And not just details, but there's some bigger issues too. Let me give you an example of a detail, though. Myra, in this movie, is a huge fan of classic Hollywood. In fact, she seems to be stuck in the past entirely. She wears old clothes, a wardrobe that's kind of modeled after classic Hollywood stars. She drives an old car. Same is true for Mae West's character. And of course, John Huston's character, he dresses like a Hollywood cowboy and rides around on a very old car with approximately 1 horsepower. Yes, it's a horse. The temporality of this movie is pretty weird. All the students are clearly from 1970. There's technology from the 70s. We're in 1970, I guess, and yet a lot of things are stuck in the past. In some ways, it's telling that the movie straddles these generations. There's a lot of movies that did that. This one is a bit confounding, their approach. They don't exactly stick the landing, but it is telling that it's straddling generations, I guess. Now, if you were trying to make a case that these Hollywood institutions are stuck in the past, then it might make a lot of sense to have some of these institutional characters, like the agent, like the head of the acting thing, the head of a studio, institutional characters. You might want them to be old-fashioned. You might portray them as being stuck in the past. But Myra, in theory, is coming to destroy the system, to destroy American masculinity. So why is she so obsessed with the past? She's trying to destroy American masculinity. Why does she praise all this traditional stuff? Why does she say things like, oh, it's such a shame that American masculinity died with Burt Lancaster, or something like that? Lancaster was still alive when this movie came out. But anyway, it could be that that this is some sort of ploy to infiltrate the acting school, to appear to be one of them, but really she seems to be more antiquarian than any of the other faculty. It's a little bit hard to wrap your head around. I mean, one possibility is that I think it's not uncommon for people to know a lot about something that they would like to undermine, or to be sort of, it's a love-hate relationship. It's a love-hate relationship with Hollywood. People who, well, maybe even someone like Gore Vidal, who might feel totally underrepresented by this really flawed system, but are also, great connoisseurs of it or something like that. That's maybe not so uncommon. Yeah, why is Myra so stuck in the past? I don't know. It might have something to do with Myron. Some of the film's progressive readings get really complicated and really shaky when we start talking about Myron, right? Myra's original identity, or however you want to put it. The movie starts out with a title scroll written in cursive. This is one of the more inane ways to begin a film. One of the most annoying possible openings is like the Star Wars crawl, but it's in cursive. And it's a letter written by Myron that fairly clearly establishes that everything that's going to follow, everything we're about to see, is his greatest possible fantasy. In some ways, Myra is either figuratively or literally a projection of Myron. Well, maybe not in some ways. I mean, it's sort of undeniable that Myra is either literally or figuratively a projection of Myron. So that's interesting. Where a charitable reading praises Myra for trying to break down masculinity, a less charitable reading looks at the whole thing as a scheme for Myron to fulfill his sexual fantasies, right? Myra, there's one male student she pursues in particular. She sees him as the epitome of, Hollywood masculinity, and she wants to, I guess you could say seduce him. If you watch the movie, you'll see it's a little bit more extreme than that. She wants to become intimate with this person, right? She's attracted to this person. Is this just Myron being attracted to this guy? This is the angle where the movie really doesn't seem as great to modern audiences, I guess. Seems superficial. Talking about this thing as a scheme seems a little regressive. I don't know. In general, everything surrounding Myron's surgery might seem pretty hokey today. This movie doesn't really delineate between being gay and being trans. I don't know the history, but I suspect that the discourse was different in 1970. There's a question in the film, this is sort of raised a number of times, about whether Myron died when he became Myra. Whether Myron died when he became Myra. This question, it's almost sensationalized. It's part of the dramatic fuel of the movie in a couple places. This is not the way that we would talk about gender reassignment or gender confirmation today, right? That somebody, I don't know. I mean, maybe some amount of this is a superficial change in the way that people talk, but I think there's probably more to it than that. Myron's operation and his character in general are part of the shock factor in this film, part of this exploitive feel of the movie. And it's hard not to feel like his character isn't at least a little bit naive, isn't at least a little bit driven by base sexual fantasy and pleasure. So that's completely different from Myra going to Hollywood with a principled stance on taking down the masculine establishment. When I think about Myra Breckinridge, I feel like I need a corkboard with some red string. I feel like it's one big conspiracy theory. I feel like a conspiracist when I'm trying to parse out even the most basic ideas of the movie. And like I said, I think you can conclude almost anything about this movie. I hope the two readings made sense. I'm not sure they did. I mean, there's a lot of threads. This movie has a lot of threads going in a lot of directions, and usually this is a fatal affliction for a movie. Usually this level of confusion destroys a film. Here I think it almost does, but I still like the movie. Why? First of all, I really like Raquel Welch in this movie. I wouldn't say that she does a great job of acting, but she sort of stumbles her way into something iconic. Myra is really a composite of a bunch of Hollywood stars, a bunch of classic stars. She inherits some of their characters, she inherits some of their accents. It's hard at times to tell whether she's coming or going. She moves in and out of these eras and these accents, these personas so constantly and without warning. The whole thing is really kind of baffling, but somehow it captures something. I think the only part of Myra Breckinridge that really works is Myra asserting herself as a successor to Hollywood legend. That part works, and really just on the strength of Raquel Welch. This is maybe connected in some sense to the film's humor, to the film's sense of humor, which is another high point. This movie has a really interesting and kind of weird sense of humor that I enjoyed. I said earlier that I don't really think of this movie entirely as satire. It's not quite organized enough to be satire. It's not quite on the ball enough to be satire. At some points, I guess it is, at some points it's not much more than your typical satire of Hollywood. There's a lot of movies that are just sort of the Hollywood satire, but I think this has some other aspects. This movie has a deep deep sense of irony to it, surrounding just about everything, that I think maybe has aged kind of well. Myra, in particular, is always sort of like on the border of sincerity. Her whole thing seems like an act, seems like a spiel, right? This kind of larger-than-life character impersonating all these. It's like, who is this person? Where is she serious? It's interesting. I think that this dynamic plays with today's sense of humor pretty well. There's a joke in this movie that I really like, where Myra is talking about some of the legends of the past and how they were totally unique, right? She talks about the Andrews sisters, and she says, you know, the Andrews sisters rolled out the barrel, and still nobody has managed to roll it back. Something like that. This really makes very little sense. It's not really even a joke, but for some reason it was very funny to me. The movie has a sort of sincere absurdism to it that I really enjoy, as if it never admits that it's being sarcastic, or it never admits that there's a joke, or it's never exactly clear what the joke is. And again, I feel like this kind of is in line with some more contemporary humor. The film rarely makes it clear when it's joking. It's not clear what the joke is or who it's on. It's probably, from Raquel Welch's commentary of the film, she surely didn't seem to know. Not clear that anybody really did. There's a little montage of the acting school at one point. We see all the students practicing their Western skills, like shooting a bow and an arrow, or sliding a glass down a bar, as one does. There's a great moment here where two cowboys are sliding the glass back and forth along the bar, and at one point, one is distracted, of course, and the glass slides off the end of the bar. This is slapstick, essentially, but the way they film the scene feels different. The actors have kind of this blank look on their faces that's a little bit baffling, as if this is some sort of posed, as if they know. There's sort of a layer of kitsch or a layer of camp here to the whole thing with these baffling looks on their faces. And on top of that, the sound effect of the glass crashing to the floor happens way too late, right? The glass falls at the end of the counter, there's a long pause, nothing happens, and then eventually you hear the glass breaking. Okay, the whole thing feels a little surreal, as if, sort of a joke about the joke or something like that. Later, we see one of the staff at the school being hit by a stray arrow from target practice. He keels over on the ground, and I guess dies. And you wonder, wait, is this staff? Is this a gardener? Someone tending the grounds? Or is it another student acting? Is another student practicing for a Western, practicing dying in a Western? The movie never answers that question, or really any question. This is a fun moment, but it also hints at some deeper ideas about illusion in Hollywood. And I think this absurdity of the film is productive, right? Partly because it disassembles the classic Hollywood film. It's interesting that this movie, features classic Hollywood so prominently when it really marks the death knell of classic Hollywood. This movie came out in 1970. That's the end, right? This is like, okay, a lot of people draw the line at 1960 for being the end of classic Hollywood, but look, let's face it, in the 60s, people were still making, big musicals and all this stuff. But by 1970, it's like, okay, the train has left the station. We're not doing this anymore. And what could tell you that more than this sort of blasphemous and bizarre movie? So like I said, satire, I don't think is really the right way to think about it. It's more, absurdism. I mean, that's one element of it. And it is a productive absurdism to some degree. This is not a deeply principled movie, but to some degree, it's a productive absurdism, revealing these questions about illusion, these questions about the myths of Hollywood, the myths of classic Hollywood, the acting school where everybody's coming to follow their dreams. Myra, who is there to destroy these dreams. Myron, who has some other complex relationship with the Hollywood legends. There's illusion all over the place in this movie. Just about everybody in it seems to be a bit of a phony, and I guess that's Hollywood. But even the acting students who hail from the heartlands of America and come to Hollywood to make it big, they're a little bit too big already. They're a little bit too imagistic to be real, I guess. There's also some moments that, to be fair, are just more goofy. For instance, at one point, Myra goes to see a judge, and he expounds the dangers of communism in the United States. He talks about the growing communist influence, and he says, well, the only thing that can save us now is the NRA, right? That's pretty on the nose. Once Myra leaves, the judge is alone, and he goes to his bookshelf behind him, and you see him take down a book, and okay, this book is going to have a hidden compartment, and he's about to do something, and you think, is he gonna pull out some bourbon and start drinking. He pulls out a blunt and starts smoking. I guess there's sort of a satirical bend to this, but it feels a bit too ridiculous to be taken seriously. To me, it's like, I don't know, just a little bit of fun. The tone of this movie, as you can probably tell, is all over the place. All over the place. And yeah, the movie plays with fire by walking the territory that it does and the subject matter that it does. But if you aren't put off by the movie, I think you might actually find it endearing. You know? Of course, there's also, I mean, the territory that the movie is treading on, incendiary, but it's also interesting. The movie really fumbles the ball when it comes to saying anything in particular. But there aren't a lot of movies that try to take as frank a look at sexual politics without descending into exploitation. Maybe frank isn't the right word for this movie, and maybe this movie is exploitative, but either way, Myra Breckinridge hit a nerve. It was detested far more than if it were merely a poorly executed film. So at the very least, it must have touched on something that mattered. That said, you do also wonder if this was a movie that in some ways was sabotaged. You know, the reception of a movie, especially controversial like this one, can really hang on a knife edge. And like I said, some of the stars of this movie were condemning it before it even came out. There's some controversial movies that have really suffered. Another example, I mean, maybe the strongest example of this is the old Heaven's Gate, which was, you know, is regarded as sort of the movie that killed tourism in Hollywood. I've seen that movie, and it really has a lot of problems. It's not that great. But there also is sort of a vulture-like nature of the press sometimes to lampoon a movie before it has even been released. And like I said, in some ways, there's something endearing about Myra Breckinridge that maybe people could have seen had they not been predisposed for a certain feeling. On the other hand, there's unavoidable controversy in this movie by design, you would think. I mean, if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. There's no way you could get around this movie being controversial. So who knows? But look, I liked it. There's more things to talk about here. I didn't touch on Mae West's character at all, really. Like I said, totally baffling, really bizarre. I didn't talk about Rusty Gudowski, a Pole from the South, who's a big part of the movie. I didn't talk about the details of the clips that are used, who is who. There's actually a clip from 1 Million Years BC, which is a movie that Raquel Welch was in that's sort of where she rose to fame, I think. There's a lot of other self-referential details in this movie. There's an angle on exoticism in this movie. Of course, there's a huge angle on eroticism in this movie. There are a lot more things to complain about, too, like the pacing. The movie sort of has a climax or two, quite literally, and then kind of goes on for no reason. Well, I don't know. The structure's a little bit wonky. Overall, though, I think I've maybe gotten my point across. I wouldn't really recommend Myra Breckinridge to you, but a 4.5 rating on IMDb is, I think, pretty harsh. I don't know if this film is exactly primed for a resurgence or a cult following. Maybe. I've heard that maybe it already has one. I haven't seen much evidence of that. But if you like interesting movies, this certainly is one, and I actually think you might enjoy it to some extent, like I did. I think on the Tobin rating system, I would have to be fair, I think I'd have to give this movie an even 16, probably. So that's Myra Breckinridge. Check it out at your own danger. Don't blame me. But look, man, it's really not that bad.